Now, I want to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is Janice Schwab, a member of our Rock Garden chapter. Janice is a native North Carolinian and has spent most of her professional life teaching science and biology in North Carolina. She has an undergraduate degree in science from Appalachian State University in Boone, and she has master's and doctoral degrees from the University of South Carolina in Columbia. Janice has received several Fulbright grants to travel and teach and study in Egypt, Sudan, Zambia, and India. And she has received U.S. National Academy of Science grants to teach in China and in Russia. One of her interests is Charles Darwin. She spent several years traveling around the world to all the sites that Charles Darwin visited in the 1830s on his couple of trips around the world, and which he ultimately published in a book, as we all know. Janice has spent much of her time teaching at Meredith College, and although now retired, she has the status of Professor of Biology Emerita, as also she's considered an adjunct professor at Meredith College. She's a member of numerous academic and professional societies, including Phi Beta Kappa and Sigma Xi. Over the past year, she's developed an interest in global warming and has traveled to the Arctic region several times. Today, she's here with us to talk about a trip that she took in 2019 in traveling from Greenland to the Northwest Passage. So please welcome Janice Schwab. Let's give a virtual hand clap for Janice. Thank you, Janice. Welcome.
Thank you, Bobby.
And ask everybody to mute your phones, please, which I'm going to do right now.
And I'm going to focus on this map at the beginning, and then I'll take it down and we'll start with the PowerPoint. I know it's not that easy to see, but it's the best introduction to the Arctic. The Arctic is much too big a subject to even begin to talk about in an hour, and I'm going to do the best I can. But the best way to look at the Arctic is from the center, the North Pole, and the trip that I took, we began here in Greenland, in southern Greenland, just above the Arctic Circle. For our purposes today, the Arctic is what is found within the Arctic Circle. And I have outlined it a bit with these black pins, so you'll know that everything that we've done is above the Arctic Circle. So we began in Greenland, and I'm going to just show you a bit of what we did in Greenland. Then we'll go across across the Baffin Strait, and we'll go to Baffin Island, to Ellesmere. Well, we won't go to Ellesmere, but I want to point out a thing or two about Ellesmere Island. And then we'll go through the strait, which is not clear. There is no Northwest Passage in terms of you get on a ship and you sail to the other side. No, you make your way through these islands, and you are not in charge. The ice is in charge. The winds are in charge, and you might not even make it even today. And you will see some examples of the difficulty it is in traveling in that part of the world, even today. We're talking about the area above 66 degrees, 33 minutes, and that's the Arctic Circle. But the Arctic is so much larger, and the reason that I wanted to use this map at the beginning, the Arctic is so much larger than we think it is, just by looking at the regular maps. Okay, so here's Greenland. Here's Iceland, just below the Arctic Circle, but Iceland is a part of the 8 countries that together administer what goes on in the Arctic Circle. Greenland is a part of Denmark. They have their independence, but they're a part of Denmark. And then there's Iceland. And then Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Finland borders on Russia. And here is the largest city above the Arctic Circle in the world, and that's Murmansk in Russia. So here's Russia, and all the way Alaska is Russia. Half of the Arctic is Russia. And then here's Alaska, relatively small compared, and then Canada, and then the northern part of Canada, which is the part where we go to the Northwest Passage. Much of it is not actually navigable at all, but we make our way through. And I want to point out one other place, which I forgot to put a black pen in. There's a white pen there, and this is the Svalbard Archipelago. The Svalbard Archipelago is part of Norway. And so I wanted to mention that now, because when you hear that again, we'll be almost finished, because I'm going to bring in a thing or two about the Svalbard at the end. Okay. Does that show the PowerPoint, Chris?
You're not quite there. You need to click on the green button, Janice, to share, and then select your PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, okay. The green button. Oh, share screen. Right.
Yep.
I was looking for it at the top. Heaven knows why. So now I can just click on my presentation.
Yep. In the bottom right, you should have a share button.
Okay.
There you go. It's starting to come through.
Okay.
And then you'll just full size your presentation.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. That does it,
There
right?
it is.
So you already know what the topic is, so we'll go. The reason that I have this map is because I want to just emphasize again how wrong our impressions are of the Arctic, and especially because of what's happening today. We think of the world, and then we think of the Antarctica as white. The Arctic is white because there's ice. It's all covered with ice. Well, not as much as in the past. For the last 10,000 years, which is the last interglacial period, there has been less and less of an ice cover than in the past, and that's what we're talking about today. So you land, as I mentioned on the big map, you land at an airfield that was built by the Americans for supplies in the Second World War. And so they turned it over to Denmark, and so now it's administered by Greenland, and it's the only place you can land commercial airliners. And they take you on the ship by Zodiac, and you always love it when when you hear the Zodiacs being taken off, because then you're going to get to go somewhere, and you love it when you hear them bringing them back up, because that means you got there, you had a good time, and you're back on the ship safely. And that's always a good feeling. So I'll show you a little bit about where we're going to go and what we're going to do. So here's Kangerlussuaq, and we go down the longest fjord in the world out to the coast. We're going to look at Sissemute for just a moment, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time in Ilulissat, where I have what I think is one of the more important things for us to consider. Everything that comes in to this part of the world has to come from somewhere. So Sissemute has a huge port. It's the second largest city after the capital. The capital is actually south of the Arctic Circle. But everything that is there essentially comes in from somewhere. Wood for the houses, the material for making boats, everything. And when you consider that everything comes in from somewhere, it makes you think about what kind of decisions you make. This is the kind of houses that they lived in this area of Greenland earlier, and by building with local materials, the sod, the rock, they were able to build with natural materials. So we're going to cross now. We're going to cross the Davis Strait. I always have trouble finding my cursor because I can't see. But we're going to cross the Davis Strait, and then go to Pond Inlet. We're not going to do anything there right now, but this is where ships have gone for a good while. You can get there from the Atlantic, so you go up and on to Pond Inlet, and then you enter Lancaster Sound, and that is the entrance, considered to be the entrance into the Northwest Passage. Now, this huge island here, Greenland, of course, is the largest island in the world. Baffin is the 5th largest island in the world, and up above Ellesmere is the 10th largest island in the world. So you're talking about a lot of land area. 8%, in fact, of the world's land area is above the Arctic Circle. And what's there? Rocks, frozen soil, a little bit of sediment. It's the world's biggest rock garden. And you'll see evidence of this when we look at the vegetation, which we're getting ready to do. We're going to Ilulissat, walking down a boardwalk, because you'd sink if you tried to go into this marshy area, which is now a World Heritage site. And so and you can't read that, but that's what that tells you. And as you go along, you see the kind of houses that people live in today. This is the corner of the area where they keep their dogs. They keep their dogs in an enclosed area. People don't keep their dogs at home. You don't go walking with your dog because polar bears are about. And so in this city, there are more dogs than there are people, but it's largely because it's a big tourism industry and they take you on dog sled rides. This is the first look we have at this huge rock garden that we call the Tundra, with the vegetation that's typical of the tundra, but we'll talk about that later. We're on our way to see the back of one of the largest glaciers in the world and the fastest moving one. This glacier is moving at a rate of about 40 meters a day. It is losing it calves off, which is losing ice, at a rate of more than 35 cubic kilometers a year. That's 35 billion tons of ice a year. This is the glacier that spawned the iceberg that came out of the Davis Strait down into the Atlantic and sunk the Titanic. So this is the source of that iceberg. This is not the glacier. This is these are icebergs that have been spawned from that glacier. They are huge, and they're still being spawned every so often. And you don't get close. That zodiac looks like it's close, but let me tell you, you don't get within. You aren't even allowed to get within a mile of this glacier, of this calving front of these icebergs. Because when these icebergs break, or when that glacier spawns an iceberg, there are tremendous waves, not to mention sometimes even earthquakes that are spawned by that. So you get used to seeing these giant icebergs. This one's close to a kilometer high. You lose perspective in terms of size. So we're getting ready to go into the Northwest Passage. So I just briefly want to give you a bit of history so you can see how quickly things are moving in this area of the world. So it wasn't until the early 1800s that voyages seriously began looking for a Northwest Passage, looking for a way across the north of Canada. The most famous one, and the one that I'm sure that many of you have read about, is Sir John Franklin's. He left in 1845, and there was no word of his expedition after 1847. They made it to Beechey Island, which many ships go to today. And as far as we know, all 129 men were lost. And that set in motion a huge number of expeditions to the Arctic to look for these people, to look for the ships, to look for the men. There was absolutely no evidence of what had happened, and we still don't know what has happened, but the ships have been found. And actually, we were able to make a stop and look down and see those two ships, the Erebus and the Terror, sitting on the bottom of the water. It looked like somebody had just lowered them very gently into the base. And of course, they're trying to find out as much as they can by the artifacts that they still are bringing up. It's a very slow process because of the weather, because of the ocean currents, because of the storms. They're only able to work about a month out of every year. They're able to actually, the divers are actually able to go down, and sometimes not even that much. So expeditions from everywhere began the great rush to learn more about the Arctic and about whether there was a Northwest Passage. The man who finally went the whole way was a very determined Norwegian by the name of Roald Amundsen. You may know him better from his making it to the South Pole first. But it took him 3 years, and he lived with the Inuit, which is something that people before had not been willing to pay much attention to. The Inuit had lived there for at least 100,000 years and knew a little bit about the area, but unfortunately, Europeans were unwilling to pay very much attention. But he paid attention and finally made it through. And Johaven, which we'll see on the map in a minute, is named for his ship, the Joa. So this is 1906. Another ship did not make it through until it was 35 years later that the first expedition actually had transited the Northwest Passage. But by 1970, only 9 ships had transited, and they all had help from icebreakers. But then we had help from an icebreaker as well. So here's Johaven. We were not able to stop there on the way out, but we did get to stop on the way back. This is really a cartoon. This tells you what you'd like to do. It doesn't tell you exactly what you're going to do, because you don't know what the wind is going to be. You don't know what the ice is going to do. So you make your way through the best you can. I think that point will be well made by the time we're finished here. This is Beechey, where the graves of 4 of Franklin's men are found, and that's a big stone fell field, nothing but rocks. You'll see that later. So we're gonna go and make our way then to Kugluktuk, which is the Coppermine River on the mainland of Canada. And then we don't go all the way out to Alaska, but by the time you get here, you're really home free, so you can get to the Pacific. And that's really what people were looking for, is a transit path from the Pacific to the Atlantic, or the other way around. So by 2015, there had been 238 ships that had gone through. Cruises were being offered to the public. That's when I first found out about the fact that Adventure Canada was offering a cruise. They go once a year. They go from Greenland through the passage, turn around and come back. Some years they don't make it, but I was lucky enough that in 2019, they made it all the way out and all the way back. So that was a nice thing. I've got this statement in here: our planet has changed color because so much of the ice has been lost that the the planet is bluer than it was, less white, more blue. I'll mention the implications of that in just a few minutes. And because there's so much more water, the wave action in the Arctic has greatly increased. And because of the wave action, coastlines are being worn down. And this is happening more in Alaska than anywhere else. Whole villages are being moved away from the coast. The reason these villages, of course, live on the coast is that you could get fish because there's an abundant supply of fish, and you can go out on the ice and fish depending on the amount of ice. But the ice is being eroded away up to 30 feet a year. And if you live on the coast, that's a lot. So the villages are being moved. So my question then that I'd like for us to think about as we go through here is, how long will it be before the summer melt outstrips the winter growth, i.e. the snow and ice that form in the winter? And when this happens for a period of time, we don't know, but it could mean that the remainder of the ice cover will, even in the summer, will collapse. I'm going to show you some evidence of this. And also I want to remind you that we are not in Canada anymore. Well, you know, we really are, but this whole area, this huge northern area, is now under the auspices of the Inuit people. They, for decades and decades, case after case, was brought forth in the courts. And so now there are 4 areas. I'm not going to give these in any detail, but the whole area, the whole Inuit area is called the Inuit Nunengat. Anytime you see Nuna in the Inuit language, it's land. So this is their land. So we were traveling through Nunavut. This is the essentially the Northwest Passage through Nunavut. Then we, just to show you this, and I'm not going to take the time to trace it very, very carefully, but if you trace this dotted line, you'll see where we came through to go back. Some very enterprising passenger did this map. But the point is, you don't know where you're going to go when you go through. Also, if you're off out in the middle of nowhere, and you'd like to sort of know where you are, especially when the ground's covered, how are you going to mark your spaces? Well, they mark them with stones, and they refer to them as inukshuk, and you see them here and there and yonder, and you should never disturb one because it means something to somebody. They're either marking a dangerous place, or they're marking a path, or whatever. Everybody talks about and wants to see the Northern Lights, and in fact, on this trip, we didn't see that many because they weren't all that active. This photograph was taken by the ship's photographer, not me. You can't take the Northern Lights with your cell phone. Believe me, it takes a lot better and more expensive equipment than I've ever owned. But this is just one example, and as I say, not nearly the magnificence that you sometimes see. So we're ready to go on land, and want to point out that you do not go wandering in the Northwest Passage in these islands through Nunavut unless you are armed and able to handle a polar bear that might suddenly show up. So when you go hiking with a bear guard in small groups, 10 or 12 at the most, and you stay behind the bear guard, but everybody keeps an eye out for bears. These people are highly trained. Actually, they are Inuit people who the ship has hired to keep everybody safe. They've never killed a polar bear. That's not the point. They don't want to kill the polar bear, but they do want to keep you safe. And so if you're not following a bear guard, they may go out. Of course, they always go out to look around ahead of the passengers. But if there are high promontories, they'll climb those and they'll be around in different areas. And as long as they can see you and you can see them, you're free to wander around on your own and see what you can find. But you always keep an eye on the bear guard to see what's going on. And if the bear guard begins to come down toward the ship, if the crew that is sort of situated around the whole area begins to walk toward the ship, you do the same thing, because that means that somebody has seen a polar bear. On this particular day, one was seen swimming in the water. You don't know where the bear's going, so you scramble everybody back to the Zodiacs, which are kept parked right here on the shore. And so when we got back on the ship, everybody was safely on the ship and they were putting up the Zodiacs. This bear just came walking right along the beach where we were and where we had just scrambled to get into the Zodiacs. So everybody was safe, and the bear was too. So I'm just going to show you a few of the beautiful landscapes and little places that you see in the tundra. The tundra is a beautiful place. In the spring and summer, of course, is when you get the flowers. You can't go in the spring and summer because the ice is at its lowest in the fall. So no tour operator is going to take you into the passage unless it's at the lowest time of the year for the ice, and that's in the fall. Incidentally, we learn in grade school that you've got 6 months of darkness and 6 months of light up there in that white frozen north. No, there are actually 5 seasons. The dark winter gives way to a gradually lightening spring, a little bit of heat, and the flowers begin to grow a bit, mostly underground. The vegetation of the Arctic is like the glaciers. Most everything's underground where it's protected. So you've got the roots, the stems often underground, and they begin to grow. And then the spring, as it warms up a little bit, and then the summer of the midnight sun, when the plants have 24 hours a day. They may have only 60 or so days to grow. That's the length of the growing season, but they've got 24 hours to do it. So they are so well adapted. And that's part of what we need to think about, is how well adapted the plants, the animals are to this wonderful environment up there in the far north. What are there? Willows everywhere. That's the most common woody plant. Birches, they're the ones that you'll see that turn the reddest in the fall, and the fall is a beautiful time. Berries are produced in the fall, several different kinds of berries, blueberries and bearberries and cloudberries and other kinds of berries. Bears eat them, people eat them, and grasses, sedges, lots of sedges, 40 species of sedges in Nunavut. And most of them are called grasses, but they're sedges. They're rushes, and the other woody plants are members of the rhododendron family, the heaths and the ledums and things like that. So no matter where you look, though, these are, as you all know, not plants. They are lichens, but they're everywhere. Mosses and lichens make up much of the ground cover. And I'm just going to show you these quickly because I've got far too much for a short lecture. But I thought you'd appreciate just seeing the diversity. There are 250, give or take, species native to the Nunavut, which is where we are. And you can see evidence of many of them in the fall. Now, one of the interesting aspects of the growth of these plants is these are woody. These are willows, but if you're a willow and you're beginning to grow and you stick your buds up a little bit, along comes the cold wind, the little ice crystals, the grit that's blowing in the wind, and you get zapped. So you keep your buds down. So this is a willow tree. And the smallest willow is only about 3 inches high, and they get up to, as high as your knee in some places that are protected and where there's water, because there is no water except in the winter when the snow falls, except in very unusual situations, some of which are happening today. But here's this wonderful willow tree, and you can see that it's doing just fine. Now, many of the plants don't even attempt sexual reproduction. They just they simply grow by putting out little plantlets on the end of stolons, or they have a large or comparatively large under the ground area that will grow into more of the plant without sexual reproduction. And if they do produce flowers, often those flowers are nodding. I don't have a picture because we didn't see any of these species, but the flowers are nodding because the winds are so strong that bees can't fly, or pollinators, they are not all bees, but pollinators can't fly. So they don't go far up off the ground, but if the flower is nodding down, excuse me, and it's about 1 inch off the ground, then the pollinators can get in to pollinate the flowers. And so they're highly, highly adapted. And people who know more about lichens than I do can tell you a lot about the conditions right here because of the lichens and the mosses that they see. This is one more tree that I'll show you. And this one, as I say on the caption, might be 100 years old. It's not even as big as my wrist because the conditions are so severe that just making a few new cells every year keeps this plant alive. And you can see that the plant is indeed alive because there are leaves. Now they're brown because the winter's coming. And little packets of diversity, pockets maybe I should say, grasses and sedges and this lousewort that looks like a fern. There are no ferns in the Arctic, or certainly not in Nunavut. There may be in the Arctic, but and so you get these little areas that are protected behind rocks or whatever, and you find a lovely diversity of things. Now, some days it's still very quiet, and you get in the zodiacs, and you can go around looking at all these different forms or different shapes of ice flow, and bring some back to put in drinks, and it fizzes like the, because it's full of oxygen. But you wake up one morning and the ice is everywhere. The ship is making its way very slowly, but it's a chore. The ship is ice strengthened, and it could make it through, but it would take us an extra day. So what do? They call the Canadian Coast Guard, and they send this icebreaker, and that icebreaker goes ahead, and you see the ice flying everywhere. They are literally breaking through the ice, as the name implies. The Canadian government keeps 17 icebreakers, and they keep 7 in the water at any one time. And so you're never more than 12, 14 hours away from help if you needed help. We just wanted to make our way faster so we wouldn't lose time, but that's what they're there for. And you never know when you're going to see another glacier. This one is almost a kilometer across, although you can't imagine that it is, because you lose, as I say, and probably will say again, you just lose perspective. Everything looks so similar that distance is hard to perceive, and it's really a different world, and I love it. Here on this fail field, this was taken on Beachy Island, where they found the graves of some of the Franklin expedition. This bone lichen, why? Because it looks like bones, and the moss that is growing there in this totally rocky. There's nothing but rocks there, but here and there you'll see this little plant or lichen that is able to get a little foothold. I think this is one of the most beautiful places we saw, with the changing of the leaves of the deciduous plants, and also the diversity of the landscape. So we wandered around there for a good little while without being interrupted by polar bears. Blueberries, as I say, we didn't see that many berries, but now and then you do run into a patch, and of course you can eat them. So I want to talk about a plant that is very, very important to the Inuit, and this is the cotton grass. It is not a grass, it is a sedge. Eriophorum is the sedge genus, and it is found all over the Arctic. It's one of the main things that you will see as you travel, wherever you are in the Arctic. They take these fluffy heads, which are the hairs around the fruit. They collect those by what seems like the tons, and they mix it with dried, what they call lamp moss, which are just some of the mosses that are growing in the same areas. So they wind them together, twist them together, and make wicks. And if they don't have the cotton grass, which in some cases maybe there isn't as much as they need to collect for the winter, or the lamp moss, they will use the inflorescences of the willows, which, as you know, what we call the pussy willow, has this a lot of hairy material, and they'll mix it sometimes with peat moss. They don't really prefer these, but if you've got nothing else, and you have to have a lamp burning, because when they're living in 24 hours of darkness, and it is dark, maybe some of you have been in the Arctic in the winter, in the period where there is no light, you have to make your own. So this is a killick, their name for the lamp, that is made out of soapstone, much heavier than it looks, I might add. And they use seal oil, except today seal oil is too expensive. So they get it out of a container, and it's Canada's finest canola oil. But they use the wick. Here's the oil. And then there are a bunch of little indentations across here. And so they keep the wicks back here, and they feed a little bit of oil, keep the lamp burning throughout the night. And anytime that they're even near where they're living, whether it's an ice house or whether it's skins or whatever. And it's the women's job, of course, to keep the lamp going all night. Which they do. So just a reminder that of where we are, and that we're in Nunavut, and I'll show you that we're at Cambridge Bay right here. This is the Inuit name. I will not attempt it and embarrass everybody, especially myself. But here's Cambridge Bay, and we were lucky enough to be able to visit a brand new, it had just opened that week, a brand new Canadian High Arctic Research Station. CHARS is what they refer to it as. And this is going to be the center of research for the Arctic for the foreseeable future. It is a wonderful facility with state-of-the-art everything. labs, information, etc. This was not one of the better days in terms of the weather, but then one never knows what the weather's going to be. And it's not going to rain, it's just going to be blowing and gritty and icy and that kind of thing. This is Cambridge Bay as a little hamlet, and I want you to notice the satellite dishes, because they are connected to the world. They're connected through these satellite dishes. And the Inuit would just as soon have had better lodgings and other infrastructure for themselves than this high Arctic research station. But I think that it's also important that a lot of research be done, because we don't know exactly what's going on in the Arctic, but we need to know more. And there's always a church. It's usually Lutheran. I think the Lutherans got there first, and so established their territory. And another one of those not so good days when we were out looking at the vegetation. And you'll see that this is a little higher than some that we've seen, because there's a little rivulet running through there, a little stream of water. And anytime there's water, of course, the vegetation is going to be able to grow better. Snow patches everywhere. Sometimes a few flowers will persist into the fall. This was late August at the time that these particular pictures were made. And although this may not seem a great deal to a lot of people, these are stromatolites. This is the evidence of the oldest life on Earth. And that's these streaks that you see through here, these dark streaks. They are made by some of the most primitive organisms on Earth. Of course, they're fossilized here. And these are the blue-green bacteria that used to be called algae, but now we know that they're really bacteria. And they lived and built up their colonies in layers. And the fossil evidence of this we call stromatolites. So these are more than 3.8 billion years old, and some of the most interesting, as I say to a geologist, places on Earth. So I'm going to go all the way back. We don't have time. We'd love to have time, but we don't. And so we're going all the way back to Greasy Ford, because that's one of the most important places in the Arctic, in the area of the Northwest Passage. And I'll use this to remind you again that everything that comes in has to come from somewhere. And there are only two stores. There are only two enterprises, shall we say. There's the Northern, and remember, everything that these people have, whether it's a vehicle or whether it's parts for the vehicle or whatever, comes in from somewhere. And so that was the Northern, and this is the cooperative, what they call the co-op. You talk about a monopoly. These are the only two stores that are selling anything throughout this part of the world. And so whatever they have is what you have. And if the ships can't get there to restore the stock, then you have to do without until a ship can make it. And sometimes it's a problem. So the thing that surprised me more than anything was dog food. Now the Inuit have had dogs, shall I say forever, and they fed them what they ate. They fed them seal meat or whatever they were eating. Largely seal is what the dogs ate. But now they're selling dog food. I think that nothing, as far as I'm concerned, says how life has changed for these Inuit more than selling dog food on a shelf. 100 years ago, an Inuit wouldn't have even known that there is dog food that you don't kill and feed the dogs yourself. It says so much about the change in their way of life. And this is the little hamlet office. There's always a central office in every little village. This is the office in Greasy Ford, and the warning that says there are polar bears and musk oxen about, so be careful. Of course, they're not warning the people, they're warning people like people on the ship who were traveling around in the area and maybe not keeping an eye out on the ground. This memorial, I think, is something that we could spend. Well, we could spend the day on just this one thing, because what the Canadian government did was to move the Inuit that they knew could live in these areas. They took them from the areas where they were living in their little groups out on the tundra and brought them and dumped them literally in Greasy Ford. There's not a lot to be proud of there, but then there's not a lot to be proud of in our country either. If you want to read about both countries, read The Inconvenient Indian. The Inconvenient Indian. It will tell you a lot about what went on. So the Canadians wanted a presence on all the islands in the Northwest Passage, and so moving Inuit onto these islands was a way of doing it. I'm going to show you just a few more patches of vegetation because it's all so beautiful. And here is where instead of walking in a willow forest, you're walking on the willow forest, because that's just a matter of inches high. And I'm very concerned about what's going to happen when more and more people are walking in on these tundra areas and these very fragile areas. What's going to happen with all those boots? In my estimation, it's a very big question. This woman made that lovely coat out of seal skin. She has trimmed it in wolverine. There's a wolverine looking very vicious in the museum. And the women made the clothes from sealskin, and it is said that the older women would have no teeth. They would have been worn down to the gums from chewing the sealskin that makes it possible to sew. Drumming is a big activity, a traditional activity, as is throat singing, which is done by women. And now it's being kept alive by these young people. They did feed us. They fed us little bits of frozen caribou, of char, the fish, the main fish, of narwhal, and a few other animals that they hunt and fish. So we got to taste these things. This little village of 50 people is where we saw, this is the only time that we saw the fish drying, which they'll keep, of course, for the winter. So I'm going to get to the discussion now that the whole talk is supposed to be about, but I couldn't just talk about changes without looking at what the Arctic is like. And so looking at this graph here, I've changed this 3 times as I got a little bit more up-to-date information. But if we start in 1979, this is the lowest extent of the ice during the year, and then we go to 91. I cannot keep this cursor in the right place. So here's 1979 to 1990. This is 91 through 2000. This is 2001 through 2010. These are averages, and in millions of square kilometers. And then 2001 to 2010 is the black line that I was on, and then 2010 or 2011 to 2019, and this is so far in 2020, this bottom line. So we see a really great change, because since this is in millions of square kilometers of ice that has been that you see the change in. So warming, the changes in the Arctic. That's what I promised to speak about. The temperatures in the Arctic are rising twice as fast. The average temperatures are rising twice as fast as the rest of the world. This has huge implications for the oceans and the great ocean currents that transfer heat throughout the oceans. Since 2007, the average summer temperature in the Arctic has flipped from below freezing to above freezing, the average. It isn't much above freezing. This morning, yesterday morning, the last couple of days or nights in Raleigh would have been what we experienced all the time. The temperature didn't vary much from one time to another, from around freezing. You could say that it was going to be 32 and you'd be close, or 0 Celsius. The Arctic has lost 75% of its ice in the last 50 years. Remember that ice reflects 80% of the incoming sunlight, and the blue water absorbs 90%. Huge warming effect. So much water is being dumped into the ocean that, of course, we're talking about sea level rise, and we're talking about wave action that I have already mentioned. Glaciers are deep. They're thousands of years old. They're thousands of feet thick. They are huge, a huge part of the Arctic. The Greenland ice sheet is melting. We were told at the end of the voyage that, in fact, there is not a place on that huge Greenland ice sheet that doesn't have at least a little bit of liquid water. And there are places where this is pouring into the surrounding ocean. It's almost impossible, I think, for us to imagine the scale on which this is happening. The permafrost is thawing. Everybody has read that the permafrost is thawing. But when you talk about permafrost that can be thousands of feet deep, the implications are just too great for me to go into today, but we ought to at least think about them. These areas, some of them have been frozen for thousands of years. What's in there? Lots of plant material, lots of animal material. When the permafrost is thawed, these things come to light, and when in a few areas the permafrost has already disappeared, you see all sorts of things that you never saw before. In 2016, over 3,000 reindeer, and of course reindeer is in Europe what we call caribou in North America, but almost 3,000 reindeer died from anthrax spores that had been released from the thawing of the permafrost. They found an artist out in the middle of somewhere in Russia who was making these lovely sculptures out of woolly mammoth tusks that had been unearthed by the thawing ice, by the thawing permafrost, which is icy soil. So methane is being released, a very important greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide is being released as these plant and animal remains thaw. In the Arctic, almost all the birds migrate. They're coming earlier. There are certain species being seen further north than have ever been seen. So much is going on. If they come, if the birds come before the insects are active, what happens? They may not be able to survive the spring. Breeding sites are lost. Nesting sites can be changed or lost. And I've said that the indigenous people and the polar bears depend on seals. Seals live under the ice. If the ice melts, neither polar bears nor Inuit can hunt anymore. And so what happens? This is the reason that they're worried about the polar bears disappearing. The seals and their pups can get separated because the seals give birth on ice and they stay on ice with their pups. People depend on ice for travel. To get from one place to another, they can travel easily with their sleds, whether they're using dog sleds or whether they're using skidoos or whatever they're using. You can get through when you have ice, but when the ice melts, you can't. Reindeer in Europe have been seen to begin their migrations earlier. They give birth earlier. Then a huge spring storm comes and kills the offspring. It's a huge change, and we could talk about it forever. There are indications that this is happening faster than we thought. There is a huge ice shelf that is just north of Ellesmere Island that I showed you. It lost 80 square kilometers. It's hard to imagine. 80 square kilometers of ice in 2 days. Now you don't want to be close to that event when those crashes start. The ship traffic has increased. There's 75% more miles traveled, nautical miles traveled than even a few years ago, because ships are going everywhere nowadays, especially through the Russian Arctic, because the Russian Arctic is easier to travel than the Northwest Passage. Fishing vessels are active, as are oil tankers. I could give you lots of information about that, but I'm sure you already know a great deal about it. Not just the commercial traffic with taking all these goods to and from, not just the traffic with gas and oil, but for example, the Russians, while we were on the ship last fall, the Russians carried a nuclear reactor across from Murmansk, across the Arctic, the Russian Arctic, to a distant place and set it up. So there is now a nuclear facility in the Arctic. What could possibly go wrong? Why are we interested in the Arctic? We are interested because there is a potential for saving a lot of distance when we're traveling from the Atlantic to the Pacific and vice versa. There is great mineral wealth in the Arctic, great mineral wealth, great energy resources, and not to be minimized, the Arctic is the last great unfished ocean. When I say unfished, I mean essentially the fish are still abundant, and of course people want to go after them. And so the very last thing I'm going to mention, I told you when you saw the Svalbard would be out of here, but just December of 2018, a ship right here in the Henlopen Strait. This is the Svalbard archipelago. There's Longyearbyen, where the global sea vault is located. And this is all nature reserve. And there was a ship up here that was blown aground by a huge storm. What was the ship doing in that area in December? When I was last in this area in 2017, we were told that no ships were traveling anywhere in this area except in the time of the year with the lowest ice. And yet here was this ship in December. It had 200,000 liters of diesel fuel on it, and it took them almost a year to get the diesel fuel out without spilling it everywhere. Everyone was taken off the ship at the time that it ran aground safely, and then they began to clean it up. And just this past summer, they finally demolished the ship. So the last thing I want to mention is something that anybody who is interested in plants already knows something about the global seed vault, sometimes called the doomsday vault, where there are millions, well, billions now, of seeds stored that represent our most important plants, our crop plants, the plants that we use for so many things on a daily basis that we don't even think about. And it came online, and the first plants were deposited in this vault, which is built back into the permafrost, 300 feet back into the permafrost before you even get to the seeds. And so in 2008, they began their accepting of seeds. This is 600 miles from the North Pole. In this permafrost that they used for building this facility, because it would keep these seeds into the foreseeable future. That was the wording they used, into the foreseeable future. Well, the foreseeable future turned out to be a lot shorter than they had anticipated, because in October of 2016, remember that's the time when there's the lowest ice and the most melting, there was a huge rainstorm. Rainstorms don't happen in this part of the world until they do. There was a gigantic rainstorm, and the computer monitors in the polar station in Longyearbyen that monitors what's going on in the seed vault. It's outside, of course, not in the city. The alarm bells went off, and so what was wrong? And they saw that water was running under the opening of that seed vault. Of course, the seeds are not sitting there on the ground. They're in special shelving that is made in the far reaches of this seed vault. So it didn't reach the seed vault, but the point is there was water running into this, and of course it would have been, it would have flooded the area had it been allowed to continue. So they had to do this upgrade. Now the seed vault cost $8 million. Norway is the country that built it. We all trust Norway. So it cost $8 million to build. To shore it up so that we can keep storing the seeds in that seed vault cost 20 million euros. So who could have seen it? So many other things are going on that we haven't foreseen, but I think that's the last thing, except there's always a quiz. Oh, did I see this temperature? Did on the ship? What did I say? Well, in degrees centigrade, which this is, we didn't say minus 30 and we didn't say plus 30. We said right around here, around zero, just like it's been the last few nights in Raleigh. That's the temperature that we saw. -40, the two scales cross. So -40 is cold. Doesn't matter how you express it. And then my second quiz question is this in the Arctic? Beautiful northern lights, better than we saw on the ship in this particular trip, but is it in the Arctic? And if you look toward the bottom, you will see along these lighted tents, you will see evidence of trees, real trees. This is the boreal forest below the Arctic Circle. So no, we wouldn't have seen trees. When you're on Ellesmere Island, you are almost 2,000 kilometers from the nearest tree, and you're almost that far from the nearest paved road. So you are out of what we normally think of as, quote, civilization, although in some ways the civilization seems to be there. So I'm not going to say anything else, and I'll be happy if Chris tells me how I can get back. Oh, I know how to get back to. Let me close this. Uh-oh.
You're back on full screen, Janice.
Oh, okay. Okay. So.
You ready for some questions?
Yeah.
Because you had a few of them in the chat.
Okay.
Mary Ann most recently asked, what was that ship that ran aground carrying? Do you know?
It was a shrimp trawler. Yes, it was going out, quote, fishing. I don't know what they were doing with 200,000 liters of diesel. Maybe they needed that much to plow through whatever they were having to plow through. But yes, it was. Let's see. I know the country, but right now I can't remember which country it was. But it was all the news release said was that it was a shrimp trawler.
Okay. Early on, Marilyn asked, what time of the year did you take this trip? And we did know that you took it in the fall, but when's their fall?
Their fall is, I got on the ship in August and I got off early October, but this was not the passage. I stayed on the ship. I am a glutton for punishment. I stayed on the ship 7 weeks. I was only on the ship from Greenland to Greenland through the passage and back from the middle of August to the middle of September. And then I stayed to go to Labrador and Newfoundland. So my trip, I got off with a broken arm in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Well, you anticipated the next question. Bobby asked, how long was the cruise that you took?
yeah, it was exactly 7 weeks. I broke my arm on the 49th day. And they took me to the emergency room. At least it was the last day. I mean, I was grateful for that. Not grateful for breaking my arm, but these things happen.
That's a lot of warm clothing to take.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, no, you wear the same thing. No, you wear the same thing over and over.
Do you have your arm wrist things to share with everyone?
Oh, I was showing Chris yesterday. One of the most interesting things that they do is to make very warm garments. All I could afford were wrist warmers. As Chris said, do you have two? Yes, I have two. I have one for each wrist. But these are made of musk ox hair. When the you know what musk oxen look like. They got this hair that hangs down to the ground. Well, they've got this fine, wonderful, warm hair underneath the big, long, shaggy. So they walk through these forests of birch and willows and whatever, grazing, actually, that's what they're doing in the summer. And they leave behind these big tufts of hair. And so the people collect them, spin them, and make them into wonderful garments. The Zodiac drivers who have to go out standing in those Zodiacs at whatever speed for hours at a time, wear these hats made out of this kibu is what it's called. And there's only one way you can get it, and that's to gather the hairs from the muskoxen.
Nice and warm. Marilyn asked earlier, at the 2 stores in Grise Fjord, is there some kind of control on the prices?
I'm just telling you what I know, and I don't know much. But looking at the prices, I'd say there isn't a lot. It's unbelievable the amount of stuff they have, but also the prices. The cheapest thing was coffee, and it was about $3 if you wanted a cup of coffee. But I didn't actually have time to do that much checking because there was always a section for the tourists. And so you go back and see what kind of T-shirts they have and that kind of thing. But I have a feeling that and especially when you're looking at indigenous people, and I cannot, and I know this is not the question, but I cannot emphasize enough what the changes in the Arctic have meant to the indigenous people. They're losing their culture. They are losing their way of life. Hunting was a way of life. There were a couple of Inuit on the ship who still make their living, as they say, off the land. The young people are conflicted between what their ancestors have always done and what they see as no real life for them. Inuit teenagers kill themselves at 11 times the rate that teenagers in the rest of the world kill themselves. One guy who was on there, a young guy, said he thought it was normal to lose your friends. It is worth a lot of our serious thought as to what's happening to the indigenous people.
Wow. Marianne asked, is anyone studying the elements? I'm guessing that might mean pollution and also bacteria, plant forms that are being released as people are visiting and new things are brought up there.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you one thing that just before I left for the trip, I read about this research vessel from the University of Delaware that was on the coast of Greenland, and it got blown into the land, and they had to abandon their research trip on the second day of the trip. And I'm thinking, oh dear, that's where we're going to be. And although we were successful at getting into Ilulissat, I showed you the boardwalk and the huge glacier. When we came back, we were actually supposed to visit Ilulissat again, because people are on the trip who haven't made the trip already, and Ilulissat's one of the most important places you could go to see these calving glaciers. And so they announced, we were all ready to go to Ilulissat. And they announced that morning that we would not be going in because overnight the wind had moved a huge glacier in front of the town, and we couldn't get to the town. And this is one of the places where it's relatively easy to get off the ship and onto the dock. The reason that they fly into Kangerlussuaq, the old military airfield, is because that's the only airfield in Greenland that you can be assured that you'll be able to land. They have an average of 1 day a year that you can't land there, and that's better than Raleigh. So that's the reason that they land everything there, because you can't be sure.
Well, that takes care of
Remember, the ice is in charge.
It certainly is. That's it for the questions in the chat. I don't know if anyone has any more questions or if there's any questions people want to ask live by unmuting themselves.
I'll be happy to do what I can.
I do have one.
Okay, yeah.
Janice, I was trying to find out, is there any one country that is particularly doing a deep dive in research? When the permafrost releases all this stuff, is anybody measuring it, studying it?
It is. The greatest change in this regard is in the Russian Arctic.
Okay.
And there are hundreds of scientists. As you know, it's a little harder for other countries to go in and do the research. However, it is under intensive research. Everybody is doing research in the Arctic because of the potential for the future. And 1/5, I'll point out, and you might say, okay, Russia actually has more to lose. 1/5 of Russia is above the Arctic Circle, 1/5 of the country. And that's a lot to be having all these changes in. Houses fall down. Communities have been abandoned because the permafrost has melted and there is no stability. You can't, even in Alaska, I saw a house where half the house had fallen about 2 feet and the other half was up on its original foundation. I can tell you that in the Svalbard, I was there in the middle of the summer and I was there in the middle of the winter. And the summer of 2015, I stayed in a little place called the Coal Miners' Cabins, and my door wouldn't shut. And I thought, well, maybe I should go down to the desk, which was in the building next door, and ask if it's me or if it's the door. And she said, no. She said, that building is falling apart because of the melting. And she said, don't worry about it. Just do what you need to do. So I did. And then when I went back in 2017 in December, man, they had shored that thing up. It had a steel foundation that was holding that thing because it had, she said, we're going to have to do something about it, I'd say, because by then the building would have fallen down in the 2 intervening years. But that's what's happening. That's what's having to be done to shore up places because of this. And that is the Svalbard. That's 600 miles from the Arctic Circle. That's 600 miles from the North Pole. But I will point out that during the long 4+ billion years of the Earth's history, there have been times when the entire Earth was covered in ice. That's we refer to it as the ice house Earth. And then there have been entire periods where the whole Earth was warm. There are palm fossils in the Arctic, above the Arctic Circle. There are huge tree trunk fossils. The climates have changed since there was an Earth. However, it is, number one, the speed at which this is happening, and number two, the number of people all over the Earth that are going to be and are, not are going to be, we already are being influenced by these changes. And when people talk about saving the Earth, please don't let anybody talk about saving the Earth. The Earth doesn't need saving. It's been through a lot more than this. What we are talking about is saving our own species. So please correct people when they talk about saving the Earth. We can't save the Earth. The Earth doesn't need saving. But we certainly are in a precarious position that we don't seem to be paying enough attention to. But I will say the Russians are paying great attention to it. Good question. Yeah.
Okay, Janice, thank you very much for coming today. And we look forward to seeing the rest of you in January at our lecture with Dick Tyler on hellebores. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Janice.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. You have You've made all the difference.
Well, you're welcome. Always happy to help, but it's all thanks to you.
Thank you,
It was a good experience.
It's fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Carolyn, thank you.
Thank you.
Ask you one last question. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What do you do about getting winter clothing? I mean, you live in Raleigh. It's not something you just have in your closet.
It is. I have collected, I've been traveling in the Arctic now for, the first trip I took to Alaska was in, I've forgotten when it was, maybe 2011 or something like that. It could have been earlier than that. And so little by little, I have accumulated my Arctic clothes, and I take the same thing every time I go. You probably don't need or want to hear this, but I have thermal underwear, and then I wear a pair of warm pants, and then over that I put an impermeable layer of waterproof, snowproof clothing, and then on top you wear some sort of little camisole underneath, and then you put on a turtleneck, and then you put on a warm shirt, and then you put on a coat, and then you put on those blue jackets over them that cut the wind, and always gloves and always a warm hat. It takes a lot of clothes, you're right, but there's no way I can buy clothes every time. I just have to wear the same ones.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how you walk with that much clothing on.
Well, yeah, let's say, and by the time you put on your boots, and sometimes you're wearing boots that are knee high, it is a problem, and sometimes you fall.
Sounds like you might need a friend to put your boots on.
And of course, if you don't have on your waterproof boots, then you wear your hiking boots, which are, above your ankles.
How did you break your arm? I was sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. It was not a pleasant experience. It was the only day. This is just so sad. It was the only day that we had gotten to the boreal forest, because above that we had always been in tundra, and this was the boreal forest, and we had a 10-mile hike, which is not a big deal, but I was so busy looking up at the trees, I just went over on tree roots, so the trees got me, and broke and broke. I broke my left arm, thank heavens, not my right one, and it was the humerus, which is of course the largest one, at the elbow. I would just as soon have broken it at a place other than the elbow, but that's not what it was. And that's what I get for hiking without my trekking poles. I had my trekking poles in my pack. I mean, is that stupid or what? And
Trekking poles are really important.
They are. But we were on a kind of track and boardwalk, and it was getting off the boardwalk, stepping onto uneven ground and hitting my arm on a rock that did it. But I should have had those trekking poles, absolutely. As a rule, I do take them.
Bless you.
And so it's just one of those things that happens to you. But I can use it. It's a little stiff, but I can use it, and by and large, it works.
You are pretty amazing. I'm impressed. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
Thank you. Anybody can do it. You just have to do it. Next year, I hope to be on the circumnavigation of Iceland, and from Iceland to Eastern Greenland, again with Adventure Canada. I love those people.
That's wonderful.
I wondered if your tour included any information, Janice, about international treaties regarding the Arctic.
Yes. They. The problem is getting one. The Antarctica treaties have seemingly worked very well, and they're trying to get more control in the Arctic. And yes, we had all kinds of lecturers on the ship lecturing about the legal problems with the Inuit and about the nations that are part of the Arctic, and that have territory in the Arctic. Yes, they did. In fact, if you're particularly interested in treaties, I will see what kind of information I have. That's the problem with a talk like this. You can't even begin to do what you'd like to do. So I thought maybe since it was a group of plant lovers, we'd look at some plants, and that took up a lot of time, I know.
Yeah. Did they have handouts for you about any of that stuff?
No, just lectures. Oh,
Just
now
lectures.
and then, now and then, one of the lecturers might have a handout, but you know, they've got to come all that distance as well as we do. So carrying a lot of luggage is always a problem. But they certainly have lectures. On days that we were not able to get off the ship, you had wall-to-wall lectures, and we learned a lot.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to put you to any trouble. I guess I can Google it, but I thought you might have some right off the top of your head. So yeah, don't worry about it. Thank you, Janice.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I know all that they emphasized was that it's a big, you know, it's a big problem.
Yes.
Every nation wants to be the only one.
Yes.
And when you've got half of the whole Arctic in the Soviets, in the Russian sphere, I tend to say Soviet because that's when I lived in the Soviet Union. But it's tread lightly.
Yes, that imbalance is my concern.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And really, it should be. I'm minimizing it just because I don't like to think about it, I guess. If you don't think about it, it'll go away.
Sure.
But next year, I intend to be with Quark expeditions through the Russian Arctic. They're taking their first trip.
Oh.
There has been no tourism, but Quark expeditions, which is the way we went to Antarctica when Ed was still living, is taking their first trip through. They were supposed to take it this year. I should be standing here telling you what it's really like in the Russian Arctic, but that was not to be. I've been to Murmansk, but that's not like the Arctic. That's just a huge city, and you don't get any real feel for what's it like to be in the Arctic. So I'll let you know next year. I'll let you know. You can go with me.
We'll see how relations are next year with that country.
That's true, and also with COVID, will we be traveling? Of course, the Arctic is a much safer place to travel, but it's getting there.
It's away.
It's what the people will bring with them. In fact, the Franklin expedition, with everybody coming to try to find the Franklin crew, introduced flu into that area. Not the 1918 flu, because it's much later, but they introduced influenza into that area.
Thanks again, Janice.
Thank you. If anybody has a question, Chris has all the time in the world.
Janice.
Well, thanks a bunch, Janice. We'll see everyone later.
Okay, I'll zoom out.
Thanks a bunch. Have a fun day, everyone. Get outside. It's a pretty day.
Thank you, Chris, again.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.